You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
Dave, are there any plants you can be planting at this time of year?
I'm laughing. There's been an explosion in the last couple of weeks, or the last month or so. As I'm sure we've all seen this explosion of colour, plant choice. If, like me, many of your listeners have already been to garden centres, itching to get out and see what's available, what's around actually, at plant centres. But particularly, I'm thinking about bedding plants. Fuchsia plugs, they're becoming available in garden centres. Spring bulbs, things like tulip, narcissus, pansies, cyclamen, muscari, that's a grape hyacinth. It's a lovely little blue swale that looks a little bit like a very early bluebell.
Right.
Plant a lot of those and you will not be disappointed. The swathe of blue is beautiful. Hyacinth is another one which we've seen a lot of recently. So the choice over the next few weeks will be very wide indeed. Lots of blue around at the moment, but then blue is a good colour to put into a garden anyway, because I don't know whether anybody just may have noticed, but when the light tends to go at the end of the day,
the blue stands out.
Blue stands out.
That.
So that's why I've mentioned it actually. Things like windflower, anemone, but certainly grape hyacinth or muscari particularly, they will show up beautifully, so you get a longer lasting hue of colour. Tip, if you're buying already potted spring bulbs, keep them in a pot and plant the pot complete plant the pot with the plant in it. The plants will benefit from being in the ground. Your flower beds or your arrangement, that'll look a great deal more natural rather than having lots and lots of brown pots or coloured pots all over the place. And at the end of their natural growing cycle, and when they die back, the pot, the container, whatever you've got them into, can be dug up, stored elsewhere and replaced with new plants. That'll help keep your garden looking fresh and new, and interestingly new over a much longer period. You can replant them next year, i.e. when your daffs or your tulips or whatever it is come back, replant them next year, no cost. It absolutely, you've paid 1 year and you've got 2 or 3 years worth of plant. Make sure though that the plant the foliage of the plant dies back naturally. Don't cut back the foliage for at least 6 weeks when you're restoring them or putting them somewhere else. So 6 weeks after removal, as the foliage is necessary really to feed the plant or the bulb. If you haven't already done so, get any bare-rooted plants into their final places. This is going to be a long answer because there's an awful lot going on at this particular moment, Daniel. Give them a good feed, water them in well. Despite this week's rain, the ground is still pretty dry. I tested that on my allotment a couple of days ago, actually. A few inches down, it was, I won't say as dry as a bone, it was still pretty dry. Just the top few inches had actually been watered in a sense. Now's the time to start planting up hanging baskets while still keeping them protected if you have a greenhouse or if you've got a shed or something like that to keep them protected. They'll need to still be under cover for a little while yet. And on the vegetable side, potatoes, they should be chitted. Lots of people are chitting their potatoes. This is where you're allowing the shoots to grow in a light, airy place. They should be going into the ground. The first early should be going into the ground traditionally about the Easter time. Second earlies and main crop goes in up to 2 weeks after that, so you get a rotation of crop of potato. If you're growing tomatoes, everybody seems to grow tomatoes apparently these days, no matter what. If you're growing tomatoes, sow the seeds in pots, place them again in a warm, airy position. There's nothing like a grand, warm, airy, sunlit windowsill for growing tomatoes. They'll be ready for planting into 3-inch plots, placing out under cover in a couple of months' time, ready to go out wherever you're going to plant them permanently. Onion sets, shallots, they can be planted in their beds. I've got them actually growing in pots at home, so I can just put them straight into the allotment in a few weeks' time. You might want to net them though, because birds just love to tug onions and shallots and bulbs. You probably notice this actually, if you put a bulb in and leave the tip showing, a bird will come along and pull it out. So they love to tug at the tops. Extra replacement job you don't need at such a busy gardening time. And you can see there's an awful lot going on. There's an awful lot of choice out there. It seems that suddenly spring is really kicking off, and belatedly though it comes, it's great to have it around.
I must say, it's nice to see all the daffodils and crocuses out. It's brightening things up.
Absolutely superb. Swades not coming here tonight. I know where they are, but a couple of days ago, my wife actually noticed that the blossom is out on the trees, on the roadside trees as well, the bushes. Great to see it back. It really does brighten the place up.
I know we're going to try and talk about water at the moment, which I know is in the sort of news at the moment. Actually, funny, we were... when we were talking to plan for this show and what sort of things we were going to cover, water was brought up, and today it's become even more relevant.
It has actually become relevant. Sorry, I was actually going to make an awful pun by saying, yes, it's a question of growing importance, water. No real puns intended, I do assure you. But, yeah, as you quite rightly say, there have been many news items over the past few weeks about how dry this particular area, the south and the southeastern area, this part of the country has been over the last couple of years, actually. It's not just a short-term thing. And we've all seen pictures of Buell Reservoir and what have you. So, in effect, we all need to be careful about how we use water in the garden or on allotments, and how we actually do. It's our responsibility, in effect, to have a look at how we actually use water. It's expensive stuff. As probably lots of your listeners and myself and yourself will know, with the water rates have actually gone up. And all gardeners should look towards storing water, whether it's rainwater from a roof runoff or the so-called grey water from machinery that you're actually using in your house, in effect, bath water, shower water, that kind of thing. It's all useful. Personally, I've got about 5 large containers that store somewhere between 600, 700 litres. That may not sound an awful lot, but it does actually tide you over a great deal. And it's my responsibility. It's responsibility on how I actually use it. Yeah. Any large container with a lid will do. And I say with a lid because nobody wants mosquitoes breeding in their water butts, which can be, a nuisance if nothing else, actually. And a tip, I suppose, is and it's something we actually mentioned when we were talking about what we would do tonight, to collect more rainwater. What I would suggest is, and this is what I actually do, bore a small hole in a lid, turn it upside down so it's actually concave, and it's like a receptacle, a water receptacle, and find a lid that's actually wider than the storage container if you possibly can, because you're actually maximising the amount of area that the water can actually get into the tank. It's best to water established plants thoroughly, though, by soaking the ground immediately around them, once or twice a week. Rather than spraying foliage haphazardly. It does nothing any good anyway, and you're just wasting water. There's no real benefit to the plant. In effect, by watering deeply, it encourages the plant to put down a stronger, deeper root system, rather than allowing it to spread roots just below the surface, which does the plant no good, does you no good. It's a weaker plant, and it doesn't go looking for the water that it actually really wants, which is obviously deeper and being stored deeper. So yeah, it's a personal responsibility that we should all have, actually, because it is a question which isn't going to go away in the near future anyway.
I suppose, is it better to water of an evening so that the sun doesn't dry out? Because if you water of a morning, the sun then dry a lot of that
very much
out.
So. There is this tendency to actually water the first thing in the morning, but lots of people sort of say, I'll water it before I go off to work. But if you can do it in the evening, it's better, because the plant has a greater opportunity to actually take up the liquid during the night time, in effect. So yes, definitely watering, if you can, in the early evening. I wouldn't suggest watering in the dark. You'll fall over things. And your neighbours might start to wonder what you're actually doing. So if you're going to water at night, water with a torch, I would suggest. My apologies, Daniel. No, it is a serious question, and it is a serious matter that we should all have personal responsibility for how we water our plants.
If you are planning to go out into the allotment or the garden over the next week and this weekend, what sort of things can you be getting on with?
Wow, again, it's quite a question. As we've already mentioned, it's a very, very busy time of the year. I suppose that given the snow and ice we had earlier in the new year, gardening generally has been on hold for a little while. It certainly has in my garden. Yeah. But now, with the expectation rather than the promise of warmer weather, they seem to be hedging their bets, all the weather people. More settled weather coming on. as we were just mentioning, actually, the tree blossoms starting to show
Yeah.
through, and your daffodils as well on the roadside, which is a very pleasing sight indeed. It's time for all those jobs that have been put off until now. So here's some on my list, and I apologise for the length of it. But the first one, I think, is weeding. The blighters never seem to stop growing, and they seem always to put on faster growth than the plants. So don't let them gain a stranglehold before it becomes a major job cleaning them out. I think that's one of the most important things. Weeds have this insidious habit of creeping up on you. You think, where did they all come from? And you spend an inordinate amount of time actually getting rid of them. Mulching around plants, and that of course will help keep down the weeds and keep in the moisture. Again, it's harking back to what we were talking about, water and moisture generally. Clearing, digging out the black gold, I call it black gold, it's compost of course, from the compost bins, and using the compost that's been made, using it as a feed and a mulch, again suppressing weeds, again keeping in moisture,
Yeah.
again feeding the plants you actually want to feed. It makes obviously the bins available and ready for the next batch of cuttings to go in. There's nothing worse than having a garden or bags and bags and bags of cuttings or compostable material that you can't actually put into the compost bin because you haven't cleared out the previous breakdown. Potting up and repotting with fresh compost those plants that have been overwintered, and for the moment checking the root ball. I think this is an important one. It happened to me a couple of days ago. I was checking the root balls of some of my potted plants, things like fuchsias for instance. Checking the root ball of potted plants for evidence of pests such as aphid. Aphid will overwinter below the soil, by the way. They're not always on the leaf. They will
Right.
climb the stem from having been in the soil over the winter. Vine weevil grubs, which are an insidious little pest actually, because they will chomp merrily away, killing your plant from below ground without you even knowing it. So checking for those, and of course the usual pest, slugs and snails, who obviously have been hibernating over the winter.
I was going to say, I've seen a few slugs and snails recently, so they're out.
They all wake up at the same time, don't they?
Yeah.
So yeah, I've noticed them as well. But again, some of them, the larger ones, will have been above surface, and I haven't seen many of the larger ones, the large leopard slugs. But the smaller ones, again, hide below ground level. So it's worthwhile checking the pots. So far, that's part of the list that we're going through. As I say, it's a busy time, Daniel.